Hello.
Is that better, Randy?
Yes, sir. Thank you. Let the record reflect, we came back in to regular session at 7:07. It was discussion only. There were no decisions made. We have a resolution on the floor that has been moved and seconded to appoint Garrett Holmes to the position of IT Director. Is there any further discussion? Hearing none, then I'll call for the question. All those in favor of the resolution appointing Garrett Holmes to the position of City of Vienna IT Director, please be polled by the recorder.
Councilwoman Williams.
No.
Mr. Azinger.
Yes.
Mr. Leach.
Yes.
Mr. Rapp.
Yes.
Mr. Bibby.
Yes.
I say yes. Mr. Mancuso.
I say no.
Okay, it passes 5-2. We move on to item number 3. It's a resolution allocating $316,755 in American Rescue Plan funds from the City of Vienna to the Vienna Utility Board for the completion of the 45th Place Water Main Improvement Project and Infrastructure Project. Be it resolved by the Common Council of the City of Vienna that it hereby assigns an additional $316,755 of the American Rescue Plan funds received by or allocated to the City of Vienna by the federal government under the American Rescue Plan Act of 2021 to the Vienna Utility Board. The allocation of said funds to the VUB is for the purpose of planning, purchasing, and/or leasing equipment, materials, hiring personnel if necessary, and funding a necessary water infrastructure project, specifically the 45th Place Water Main Improvement Project, undertaken by the Vienna Utility Board and is contemplated by the ARP. I'll entertain a motion for the approval of the resolution allocating $316,755 in American Rescue Plan funds from the City of Vienna to the Vienna Utility Board.
So moved.
Second.
It's been moved and seconded that we approve the resolution for the approval of the transfer of $316,755. This is a project that the Utility Board has been working on for a long time. And when the bids were opened the other day, this bid came in at approximately $200,000 below what the engineering estimate was. We have a good history with the contractor that bid on this project and have every degree of confidence that it will be completed in a timely manner and a good job. So is there any further discussion? Hearing none, then I'll call for the question. Would you poll the council, please?
Ms. Williams.
Yes.
Mr. Azinger.
Yes.
Mr. Leach.
Yes.
Mr. Rapp.
Yes.
Mr. Bibby.
Yes.
I say yes. Mr. Mancuso.
Yes.
That's unanimously. Thank you. The next item on our agenda this evening is an ordinance amending Vienna Municipal Code 1333.05, uses of structures, paragraph E, amending the definition for abandonment. Mr. Skogstad, do you have that in front of you? Would you read it, sir?
Can we read the whole thing?
One time.
Okay. An ordinance amending Vienna Municipal Code 1333.05, uses of structures, paragraph E, amending the definition for abandonment. Be it ordained by the Common Council of the City of Vienna that paragraph E of the Vienna Municipal Code is hereby amended as follows. 133.05E abandonment. When a non-conforming use of a structure or structure and premises in combination is discontinued or abandoned for 12 consecutive months, the structure and premises in combination shall not thereafter be used except in conformance with the regulations of the district in which it's located. 2, for purposes of this section, abandonment means the complete cessation of the business's commercial, industrial, residential use or activity. 3, that the nonconforming property is vacant with active utilities and/or is being actively marketed by the property owner as a commercial, residential, or industrial parcel or property is not sufficient for the property to retain its nonconforming use. 4, if the property is vacant and is not in use by a business with a valid active business license, if a commercial or industrial nonconforming use property, or if the property is vacant and not presently occupied by a tenant, if a residential nonconforming use property, and it is evident from an examination of the nonconforming property that the nonconforming business or industry is not actively in operation or the residential property is not occupied by a residential tenant, then the nonconforming use shall be considered abandoned. 5, before issuing a building permit or certificate of occupancy for any nonconforming property, the code enforcement officer shall determine whether the nonconforming property has ceased its commercial, residential, or industrial activities for a period of 12 months. A, if 12 months have passed since the commercial, residential, or industrial property has ceased its commercial, residential, or industrial activity, it is presumed that the nonconforming use has been abandoned, and notice of the same shall be sent by certified mail. Return receipt requested to the property owner. Further, if the owner of the property cannot be served by certified mail, such notice shall then be sent by Class 2 legal notice as per West Virginia Code. Paragraph 6, the property owner may appeal any determination by the code enforcement officer to the Board of Zoning Appeals. All Board of Zoning Appeals may be heard by the Vienna Municipal Court. All Vienna Municipal Court appeals may be heard by the aggrieved party petitioning the Wood County Circuit Court.
I'll entertain a motion on first reading for the adoption of the amendment amending Vienna Municipal Code 1333.05, uses of structures, paragraph E.
So moved.
Second.
It's been moved and seconded that we adopt on first reading the ordinance amending Vienna Municipal Code 1333.05. Is there any further discussion? Yes, sir. Mr. Leach?
Well, if Kim,
No, go ahead, I'm sorry.
so this ordinance and the following two ordinances were all three presented to the Planning Commission. This particular ordinance was discussed, failed even for a motion to be considered for a vote by the Planning Commission. That's the purpose of the Planning Commission, the expertise of the Planning Commission. I spoke against this ordinance for a number of reasons. It was represented in the Planning Commission. In fact, this followed state law. It does not. State law does have a 12-month limitation that says that if it's 12 months vacant, it's presumed abandoned, but that, if in fact that evidence doesn't exist, this ordinance was and the following two are targeted to a couple of vape shops that are in the city of Vienna, which has always been my position. Our community is going to decide the fate of these types of businesses, and I think we're already seeing that in action with respect to these two businesses. But regardless, the Planning Commission did not support this ordinance, nor do I. And just briefly, the reason. We only have one property in Vienna that's even subject to this right now, which was the Dairy Queen, which became a vape shop. The person that owned the Dairy Queen and invested in that, kept the utilities on, continued to attempt to lease that property throughout this time period. Ultimately did so or sold it, I'm not sure which, but regardless, it was certainly not abandoned. And so, we're talking about we want to grow the city of Vienna and that we want quality businesses, but it's just like Miss Rhodes when the car wash, went in. She had a very negative opinion. That's fine. But it is not our job as council people to dictate what ideas entrepreneurs want to attempt to do. And if it's not a good idea, if it's not a fit for our city, then it's not going to go anywhere. And we've seen that happen time and again in the city of Vienna. To make a hard and fast. If you don't get that property, so what if this happened during COVID, right? Somebody had a property, nobody's doing anything. According to this ordinance, you're done. It could be your life investment. It's the same point I made to the Planning Commission. This is draconian, it's unfair, it's not balanced, and I absolutely oppose it.
Well, while Mr. Leach may think it's draconian and unfair, I go back to what the ordinance says. If you go into our zoning regulations and you look at the intent, okay, from 1997 when this was updated, the intent for non-conforming properties was, at that time in 1997, was to allow them to exist, okay, but to continue until something changes, and then, but not to encourage their survival, okay? So what happened regarding the Dairy Queen, it was when they moved down the street to 28th Street in Grand Central, they left that property and it laid vacant for nearly 3 years, okay? And during that time, under our ordinance, it should have reverted back to residential, not been commercial at all, but that didn't happen. And I think this is, and I did attend the Planning Commission along with Mr. Leach, who sits on that board, but, the city attorney had said, well, this could have gone either way. And so I think through Mr. Mancuso and the city attorney and Kevin Parrish Code Enforcement have put a lot of time and effort into this and to make sure that it's better defined. So I think that this ordinance defines things the way they should have been defined probably in 1997. It clears that up and we have some clear language here and can move forward. And while, in a perfect world, we let the market decide, settle things, we all believe that, as Mr. Leach just pointed out. But sometimes not all businesses are really appropriate for your community. I think if we had for example, if they wanted to put, strip clubs or something, I'm sure they would be supported. It doesn't mean that's what the people of Vienna want. So I think we have a right to, this is already in here under non-conforming. This has already been done. We just need to follow the law, and we have a right to have our neighborhoods really be what we want them to be. This is, this vape shop, this piece of property is not in a commercial zone. It's in an R2, a residential zone. So I think this cleans it up. I think this is a good ordinance. It's a good amendment to the ordinance that already exists, and so obviously I support it.
So, Ms. Williams, if you would, excuse me, Councilwoman Williams, if you would, your opening remarks said the intent. How do you define intent? Is that your opinion, or is that something that I'm not reading in the way this was originally documented?
The intent, this language is taken directly from the city code and ordinances. You can go and read it. It lays out the intent of the zoning and what they're trying to do, and then it goes on to say this. And so it does say the intent of the zoning regulations for nonconformity can exist and continue until they are removed, but not to encourage survival. That's what it says. And that's what we're doing by, hey, we have some language needs cleaned up, whatever, we need it better defined, but the intent is not to encourage the survival. We understand that we're going to have them, and what's the fairest way to deal with them when they no longer exist in that non-conforming way that they were. And that's what happened here.
So the intent that you're referring to is as you interpret it, because I was also at that planning commission, and I was also part of the decision-making when the Dairy Queen was being in operation. The code enforcement people do not feel the same way that you do, and the planning commission did not forward it. And I just don't understand how your definition of intent defines this, because of the people that deal with it every day, and the planning officials that we have been here a long time.
I'm not speaking of my intent. I'm saying that's what the ordinance says. And give me a second. I'll pull it up and read it.
Well, Mr. Mancuso, I'm sure you have a remark.
Yeah, if I can, if it's okay, Kim, if I
No,
jump in.
absolutely.
Okay. So yeah, I guess, first of all, I would love to kind of give an introduction to all of these as we get to them, but I'll focus on this one first. So yeah, I mean, I have spoken with Kevin, who is our code enforcement officer, at length about this. I've spoken with Russ at length about this. And, there was a gray area in our ordinance about abandonment and what that means and the definition of that. The goal of this ordinance is to clarify that so that there is no gray area, so that our code enforcement officer is not beholden to making a decision that is of a gut instinct or of he has clear direction from our ordinances that say, hey, this is what abandonment means. So if it is abandoned, then there's no questions. And so the intent of this ordinance in regarding to the definition of abandonment simply seeks to clarify the term abandonment in our ordinance so that should it occur again, I understand that we only have one property right now, and that's okay. But that's not to say we're going to have other properties in the future should we change our zoning or update our zoning. And this will need to be clarified because the growth and development of the city of Vienna is orchestrated and developed by the Planning Commission. The Planning Commission decided that this area of Vienna should be residential. And if it should be residential, then that's the way in the direction that it should be pursued. So this clarification in our ordinances is to simply do that, clarify what abandonment means so that there's no gray area, so there's no sticking points. I don't believe it's draconian. I think it helps clarify our ordinance and make sure that when our code enforcement officer is requested to make a decision, he can turn to this and say, here's what it says, here's why I'm making this decision. And I think that this very much helps in that decision-making process.
Did you find your reference, Kim?
Sure.
All
It's 1333.01, intent. And there's 4 parts to it. And, A, within the districts established by this zoning ordinance or amendments that may later be adopted, there exist lots, structures, and uses of land structures which were lawfully before this ordinance was passed or amended, but which would be prohibited, regulated, or restricted under the terms of this ordinance or future amendments. It is the intent of this, Part B, it is the intent of this ordinance to permit these nonconformities to continue until they are removed, but not to encourage their survival. Such uses are declared by the ordinance to be incompatible with permitted uses in the districts involved. It is further the intent of this ordinance that nonconformities shall not be enlarged upon, expanded, or extended, nor be used as grounds for adding other structures or uses prohibited elsewhere in the same district, and it goes on to C and D. So,
I actually like this amendment, and I'm trying to see it through the lens of I don't care what business goes into it, and a lot of attention has been given to, we dealt with this earlier, last year about what kind of business was going in, and I don't really care about that. I think we do need that clarity. I did speak with code enforcement also, and this would benefit his efforts in trying to enforce things. So I do like this one personally because of the clarity that it gives, and it is the only property that affects, and it doesn't mean that we're not business friendly. It means that we're trying to also honor the residential zoning that has already been determined by the Planning Commission and that kind of stuff. So,
The business that was in the Dairy Queen was a business for more than 50 years. And so over the years, over the course of that 50 years, it could have been revisited at numerous times. And I think it's interesting simply because a business that some people don't care for went in there, it's caused all this discussion. If that thing would have went back to being a restaurant, I don't believe you'd hear a word out of this. And Councilwoman Williams, I can tell you that the building that you currently operate out of in recent history was a bicycle shop, but in the past it was a movie theater. And so if that movie theater decided to show R-rated movies or whatever, there could have been a major uproar about getting that movie theater out of the center of town because we don't want that in here. And so these things come and go, but I mean, it's just one of those things where, that is a commercial piece of property, and it had many successful businesses in it over the years.
So my business, 2910 Grand Central Avenue, is in the commercial district. The property that we're speaking of on 34th Street in Grand Central is in an R2, a residential area. It exists because it's been grandfathered in as a nonconformity. And I just read what the intent, what we're supposed to do when, these nonconform properties don't exist any longer. So I think you're really muddying the waters when you're comparing something that legally exists in the commercial district versus something that exists as a non-conforming property in an R2. It's totally different.
Yeah, I don't like vape shops. I don't like smoking. If I was a benevolent dictator, I'd do something about it. But I don't know what the guy paid for the property, but it was a lot more than he would have paid if you could build a house on it. I would bet. I don't know. Now, I don't like gambling joints, and I don't like cigarette shops, but they're legal. And so, if you would have forced that guy to, whoever bought it, to convert it to residential use, he would take a very substantial financial loss on it. And if you want to be business friendly, you don't do that to people.
Mr. Bibby, do you have any comments this evening, sir?
Well, I'm not going to vote for it. Basically for all the reasons that have already been discussed from other council members, we're looking at both sides of it. In fact, though,
Mr. Bibby, did we lose you?
no, I'm here. What? Did you get anything?
Yes, sir. We didn't get your last half a sentence, Roger.
I understood what.
Oh, you got it? I'm sorry.
I was just stating that, my decision is based on hearing both sides of the council comments that were made this evening. Therefore, as I said earlier, I don't support it.
All right. Are there any further comments?
Yeah, I just want to make one clarification here because I agree. I think we've talked about a lot of different things here, but the focus of this ordinance, specifically this ordinance that we are voting on right now, has to do with clarifying a definition so that our code enforcement officer can have something to fall back on when he makes his decisions. That is all this ordinance does. I am not trying to propose this ordinance for any other reason other than to clarify a definition. I am not attacking businesses. I am not supporting businesses. I'm not trying to retroactively make any decisions. I'm saying that a decision was made because there was some gray area and there was confusion about how that decision got made. This ordinance that we have to change that definition simply clarifies what abandonment means so that our code enforcement officer has something to fall back on and isn't accused of making a decision based on his opinion of anything.
One question for me. This is to Mr. Skogstad, to Mr. Mancuso's point. If this would pass tonight and we clear up the definition, right? If the vape shop on, the 3400 block of Grand Central Avenue remains successful and it's there for 50 years, passing this tonight will change that in no way whatsoever. So we're not harming anybody.
Mr. Leach?
Okay, so this is the offending property that's generated this interest in putting a hard and fast rule that, as Mr. Mancuso, Councilperson Mancuso wants to say, gives clarity to our code enforcement. The law requires balance and requires judgment. So there was a line drawn at, 34th Street or whatever it is. And here is Elke's, right? And then we've got abandoned buildings there. We have abandoned buildings all over Grand Central. So let's say this was your property, okay? And throughout COVID, you couldn't lease it. You paid the utilities, you paid your property taxes, you did everything you could to protect your investment in this property. But due to what's happened in our community, our country, all right, things didn't come together. And so if this ordinance had been in place, then the person that owned this clearly originally built commercial property would have lost their grandfathering for that piece of property. Therefore, what do you do with it? Okay, are you going to convert this into some ugly looking apartment? It's not suited for anything but commercial property. And that's why judgment matters. And that's why, like, we're going to have at some point 57th Street come up, and it's going to be a part of the discussion. There needs to be the exercise of discretion, and that's our job as council people, to weigh and balance the interests, protect our citizens' interests, both. It's not our job to legislate morality. It's not our job to decide what businesses, other than, like, for example, on 57th Street, there's a big concern, this gentleman here from the church, across from there. And it, for example, just by virtue of where that building is, it is the most restricted commercial, or restricted by proximity to a church as far as commercial use. Okay, so we have those protections in place. So I can't agree, and this is not in conformity with state law. What state law says is that if it is abandoned, quote unquote, in other words, vacant for 12 months, then it's presumed, unless there's evidence that that's not the case. And you just remove all discretion in that. And that's why, what would you, if you had invested and this was kind of your nest egg and this was it, and all of a sudden the city of Vienna came and just cut your legs out from under you, regardless of what the facts were, regardless of what the situation was, no discretion, no way to plead your case. I just can't agree with that.
I have a question, since
Sure.
you brought up about how it's split down the middle of the road on 34th Street. So I go back to previous councils in 1997 when they redid all of this and they redid the map and decided on all the zones. At that time, wonder why that council didn't put that piece of property in place. They had a reason to do that.
I think it would be
And-
gerrymandering. I mean, you'd have to carve that, because
Well,
from
gerrymandering
there,
has to do with voting. It doesn't, not.
yeah, but you understand the principle.
Well, no, I don't. Not
Okay,
in
then
this
you don't.
regard, because they could have included that property very easily. There was a reason that they didn't. Here it is, 25 years later, 20, whatever it is, and we're trying to, say that doesn't matter. And, it's like they've clearly spelled out what the intent was. And back to Mr. Mancuso, what he's saying, this doesn't change anything. The vape shop's not going anywhere, whether we like it or not. I mean, I'm not a fan of it. I'll be the first to tell you, but it's there now. I can deal with that. It's going to remain there, whether we change and update this definition to be, clear or not. It's not going to change anything.
I do also want to clarify. I also want to clarify here as well. In Part 6 of this ordinance, we have an option. The property owner may appeal any determination by the code enforcement officer to the Board of Zoning Appeals. So there is an out.
Yeah, but he might not win his appeal.
I understand that, but that gives him an option to provide valid reasoning for why it should remain commercial or remain non-conforming.
Like why he hasn't abandoned it. It's because it's
Correct.
COVID, a second round of COVID.
Yeah, and I
Okay.
think any kind of understanding person, if anything were to ever happen like that again, where a pandemic shuts the world down for 2 years, that seems fairly understandable to me. But
I want to go back and say, I know that you're right. I mean, if it hadn't been a controversial business that was going in there, we probably would have overlooked this again, just as in previous years. But the fact remains is that it was a gray area, and what that did was it exposed a weakness maybe in the ordinance. And I think that anytime that happens, whether it's something that we agree with or not, I think we should reevaluate it, because I think we all like to be able to have something to refer back to and say with assurance, see, this is what it says. But in this case, I do think code enforcement was really put in a tough situation, and there were a lot of things that became the issue that wasn't really the issue. And so I think we should pass this. And I like that again, yes, you're right, Chris, that if the owner is in a tough spot, the current business goes out, the owner still has the property, and something happens, or maybe they fall ill, or something happens, and they need to come to the Board of Zoning Appeals and say, I'm asking for an extension, or I'm asking for a courtesy. This is what's happening. I don't want to abandon it. This this is my situation. I'm glad that there's a provision in there for that. I think that does still show good faith towards being business friendly. And honestly, I mean, it stinks that we're in this situation, because when they rezoned this, that's, in my opinion, who kind of screwed things up. You know, I mean, they maybe should have taken it to the next city block or whatever it is, whatever needed to happen. Why in the world did they not take an existing business? They were basically at that time saying, sorry. And I think that's very not business friendly. So either they wanted to support that current business, or they were just hoping that eventually they would lose their status and have no regard for what they had invested in the property. You're right, Jim. I mean, if it was me and I'd invested that money in that property and it was mine, I'd be upset. But that was something that was determined a long time ago, and I would disagree completely with their decision when they did it. If I could go back and do it retroactively.
All right. I think I'll call for the question on this. All those in favor of the order? Okay, Roger, I'm sorry.
Can I make one more quick comment? Come on, let's face it. If this wasn't a vape shop, we probably wouldn't even be talking about this tonight. And I'm sure if it was a Bible bookstore, the Vienna Baptist Church would be in council chambers up there now supporting that. You know, and so the point is, and you know, back, you know, and I don't know why it was voted the way it was many years ago, but you know, I don't like them either. And Vienna's got too many of vape stores. When you start at the lower end of town and go to the other end of town, you can go to 4 different vape stores on your way through the city. You know, we don't need that many. But irregardless, it is what it is. It's there. As it stands, the fella put it in legally, and I think we just need to, you know, we need to go with it. Now, having said that, I sure realize the fact is that if there are any future incidences such as this, we've sure learned our lesson, I believe. However, you know, I don't think, or I cannot think of anywhere else in the city where this could occur. So we're dealing with a one-operation outfit, in my opinion. So, thank you.
Once again, this is not about being a vape shop. 100%, this is not a vape shop issue. This is a weakness in an ordinance that left gray area for code enforcement. And I believe we're supporting code enforcement in giving him something to go back on and refer to and justify a decision as to whether or not a piece of property has been abandoned.
Good. Is code enforcement represented there tonight?
He is not. Mr. Skogstad would like to say a word.
And I'll try to say this as, well, as best I can. Essentially, the ordinance that you have in front of you is an amendment setting out redefining what abandonment means. Under our present ordinance, abandonment is very frequently left with a very broad guideline, and it's left to the judgment of the code enforcement officer. In the past circumstance that we had that caused this issue to arise, the code enforcement officers exercised his judgment in conformity with what has been long-standing city policy, which is to be pro-business. This ordinance, you can look at it one of two ways. It either gives the code enforcement officer a mechanism to directly point to justify whatever decision the code enforcement officer makes, and gives an avenue for that to be appealed. And there still is an avenue for those decisions to be appealed in place in the code. Or you can look at it as it takes away the discretion of the code enforcement officer to exercise his judgment. And that's essentially what this is. This is either a mechanism for the code enforcement to say, I exercise my judgment and these are the reasons that I used, and be able to point to a rule. Or the code enforcement officer can say, I exercise my judgment based on the rules that we have in place, and this is the decision that I made. And that's what happened here. You had the code enforcement officer exercised his judgment in conformity with the currently existing statute that, or ordinance. And as I set out in my memo to council, this was a decision that the code enforcement officer could have gone either way. What this does, all this ordinance does is give criteria for a code enforcement officer to make a decision to point to when they make their decision. Ultimately, no zoning matter is final. They're all subject to review either through the court system. And so that avenue is always available to anybody, to anyone who is affected by a zoning issue. So hopefully that clarifies what this is. I'm not taking a position as to whether it needs to be done or whether it doesn't need to be done. The net effect is you can either rely on the code enforcement's judgment with the current rules that we have, and you may or may not like the decision, or you can give the code enforcement officer a set of more defined rules, which the code enforcement officer would apply. And again, you may not like how those rules get applied, because you may be the person on the flip side of this that has a business that has stayed abandoned for all of the reasons that Mr. Leach has pointed out, that now has their property go from being a $200,000 commercial property, but because the city has a hard definition of what abandonment is, that property may only be valued at $50,000 or $100,000. But either way, that's what the net effect of this is.
I have one more statement. So when I spoke with code enforcement about this, because I read everything through on all of these ordinances that Chris brought forward, and I read them through in my layman's terms, and then I needed to go to him and find out kind of where he was at with things. And one of the things that he specifically brought up was in number 3. It says that the non-conforming property is vacant with active utilities and or is being actively marketed by the property owner as a commercial, residential, or industrial parcel or property is not sufficient for the property to retain its non-conforming use. And we kind of follow that line of thinking to see what that could potentially mean. That means that without this, because before it was like, well, they're still paying the utilities, the lights are still on or the water's still on. And that was like one of those points of contention that we were having here. This is saying, hey, us as a city, we're being pro-business, but we also need to be pro-citizen and pro-neighborhood. And I am just speaking hypothetically. I do not know this property owner. I don't know what he is going to do with it in the future if the current business does not succeed there. However, if this property owner wanted to if this business leaves and they just want to sit on it, they can just sit on it. And as long as they're paying the water bill or the electric bill or whatever it is, then, or if they want to say, hey, I've got it on the market, and it could be on the market for 10 years, or they could have the water on for 20 years. And as long as they're doing that, they're in compliance, and that would not be considered abandoning the property. And so as a city, then we're driving past a piece of property that, yes, it has electricity still going to it and he's still paying the bill, but years and years and years and years and years go by and it's still just an eyesore or unused. So I still think we should pass this.
Excuse me.
Go ahead, Tom.
I don't think that scenario would happen once in 100,000 times, because when somebody buys a piece of property, they buy it for financial gain and not to look at it.
I mean, it did sit vacant for a while this past time.
So you put lemonade 5 cents in the window, okay? And you have a business license for $5. So it just, I don't see the intent of this achieving what I think Councilperson Mancuso is talking about. All it does is chill, people, and we have opened businesses outside of cities and placed our businesses outside of cities just for reasons like this, right? We're not going to be in the city because you get all this stuff, and if you don't think that's true, talk to people on the other side of the city line. Why'd you put your business here? I don't want to be in the city.
I think we've discussed this enough this evening. I think everybody knows their position. So at this time, I'll call for the question. Would you poll the council, please?
Ms. Williams?
Yes.
Mr. Azinger?
No.
Mr. Leach?
No.
Mr. Rapp?
No.
Mr. Bibby?
No.
I say yes. Councilman Mancuso?
Yes.
All right, it fails 3-4. Next item on our agenda this evening is an ordinance on first reading creating exterior lighting standards. I'm going to read this one by title only because it is like 10 pages long. And so I know you all have had it in the Dropbox and had a chance to read it. Be it ordained by the Common Council of the City of Vienna that it hereby adopts the following ordinance with respect to the regulation of exterior lighting throughout the City of Vienna. Mr. Mancuso, this is yours. I assume you'd like to lead off.
Yeah, I would love to give an introduction to this. So the intent and purpose as listed in part 1 of this is to provide clear regulations for lighting on commercial properties to kind of help with light pollution in the city, especially if you consider commercial zoned areas next to residentially zoned areas and how much light can affect someone's backyards or neighborhood or whatever. It also helps create kind of an elevated expectation for what the city should look like and how we address lighting in our city to create some consistency there, as well as efficiency in lighting and making sure our lighting is directed where we want it to be and is as bright as it needs to be for a parking lot to be safe and those kinds of things. So that's kind of the intent and purpose of this, as well as to kind of help regulate that on our commercial properties.
I'll entertain a motion for the approval of the ordinance on first reading creating exterior lighting standards.
So moved.
Second.
It's been moved and seconded. Mr. Azinger, comment?
I just have a question. I assume this applies to residents.
No, it
Not
only,
at all?
it only applies to commercial property.
2 comments, and I'm not going to go on and on about this. Number 1, I know that neither the Planning Commission nor Code Enforcement supports this ordinance. And also it's a problem of enforcement. Anytime that you have ordinances on the books or rules, laws, whatever you want to call them, and they're not enforced, that waters down or weakens the things that we do choose to vote and support. So I do not support this, neither does the Planning Commission and neither does the Code Enforcement.
If I can make a comment on that, I have spoken with Kevin for many months on this ordinance and making sure that it was enforceable for him and describing the ability for it to be enforceable. So to say that the Code Enforcement does not support this is completely inaccurate. I have spent months working on this with him to make sure it was enforceable, and to make sure it was affordable and enforceable to the code enforcement officer so that if it passes, he has something to look at and enforce.
Are you representing that Kevin Parrish supports this ordinance?
I am saying that I have spoken with him many times to
That
make
it's
sure that
important.
it is enforceable.
Your Code Enforcement guy is going to say, I'll enforce it if that's the rule. Okay, I get that. Does he support it? Did he tell you he supports this ordinance? Because that's not my
He would
understanding.
not say one way or the other. He didn't say he didn't support it either.
Okay, so in looking at the details of the ordinance as it's drafted, there are several conflicting things that are in there because of the height and what have you of these new regulations. If you look at the Grand Central Mall, if you look at Hobby Lobby, if you look at any of the commercial businesses that we have, every one of those light towers exceeds the height that you are permitting in this ordinance. All right? And so if this thing were enforced today, it would be incredible money for these people to change these lights. That's not what it says. It says if there's a major development and you go in and you do this, then you must comply with this ordinance. That's huge money. All right? And I also, Jimmy, you'll have to clarify this for me. Did this get passed out of the Planning Commission?
No.
Yeah. I know, and I'm sorry, I think we're doing a knee-jerk reaction here to the vape shop. The one on 20th Street is incredibly bright. I'll give you that. There's no question about that. But to try to redo all of the lighting I don't believe that's a I don't think that's a good solution for this one.
Okay, so can I clarify a couple of things then on this? So actually, the height, correct me if I'm wrong, Russ, we took out the height restrictions. So that is no longer a restriction in this ordinance. Secondly, the intent of this is, as I said in my introduction, to elevate the standard in the city of Vienna for lighting. One, that means using more efficient lighting and directing lighting where it needs to go. So I think it's very clear, and the reason it's 10 pages long is because of the definitions in here to help make it very understandable and very clear what the intent of this is. It is not a knee-jerk reaction to anything. It is simply an opportunity to provide the city of Vienna with a better lighting ordinance that is updated and revised to today's standards. This was actually borrowed from another city and municipality, and you can find these kinds of ordinances all over the country. And it has to deal with safety, efficiency, and creating just a better environment overall, which I think is really important for the city of Vienna.
Can you tell me any location in the city of Vienna besides the vape shop on 20th Street that would not be in compliance? This to 20th Street, I'm sure is not, but where else?
I don't know that there is anywhere specifically that is not currently in compliance with this, other than perhaps the full cutoff fixtures, which would help kind of direct lighting towards a parking lot or towards a commercial property and not bleed out into a residential area. But that doesn't mean that it's still not relevant or important or helpful in future businesses that come into play, because the city of Vienna right now really doesn't have any restrictions on this. So another business could come in a commercial property, say Dutton's Pharmacy, for example, and they could light that thing up and, you know, make it blindingly bright, and the city wouldn't really have any jurisdiction to say, no, you can't do that. So that's what this ordinance is to kind of help prevent in the future.
So I have a comment. Well, first of all, I want to thank you actually for bringing this to council this evening, because as you just mentioned, we have to be proactive, not reactive, okay? And things don't stay the same. Businesses change, whatever. People have different ideas of what they want to do. And we are very vulnerable to being, like he just said, I mean, we could have it lit up like a Christmas tree. And I know what happened on 20th Street, I mean, we all got calls, and it is kind of difficult. Melissa lives on 20th Street, I'm sure she can attest to this. It's kind of difficult at night to pull out of 20th Street onto Grand Central. That's a really difficult intersection to navigate anyway, but it's because of all the lights. So I think this is a very measured response to probably what we need to do for the future, where we need to be. But I wanted to point out one thing here, and this was brought to my attention. I didn't know this, but after it was said to me, I was like, oh yeah, of course. That there should be an exemption for flagpoles, American flags, like down at the credit union on Grand Central. Okay, it's lit up. And so I would like to make an amendment to under blah, blah, blah. Let me see, paragraph 4 under exemptions, to exempt properly illuminated American flags displayed from sunrise to sunset every day. Because if you go and you look at the guidelines for how we display our American flag, if you're going to leave it up, day after day, then it needs to be illuminated at night. And I think that's a very reasonable thing to add to that as an exemption.
It has not been seconded.
I'll second it.
Okay, so it's been moved and seconded that we amend this ordinance to include the exemption for a flagpole. Are you by any way of your definition here specifying whether or not this thing is to be illuminated from the ground, or are you putting any restrictions in with that? Because if you go down to the Gold Star Memorial down at Spencer's Landing, there is a light down there that is probably 18 inches square that lights that flagpole. All right. if you put that exemption in here and you don't stipulate something about the direction or whatever, I mean, that thing's like a searchlight down there. It's so bright.
Sure, I understand that, and the reason I said properly and illuminated American flags displayed from sunrise to sunset every day is because if you go to section 5B, it's, I think, addressed there. Sorry. Yeah, providing light. Maybe I got the wrong number. It's, hang on for a minute, I'll find it, but
Well, let me ask a question, because we talked about this was for commercial property, so then maybe it doesn't apply to parks?
oh, true.
So maybe the down there at the Gold Star Memorial, it wouldn't apply because it's a park and it's not commercial property. Is that right? Well, true. That's true. Thank you, Russ.
Okay.
And so just to,
We have an amendment in a second to add the language for the exemption of flagpole lighting. Is that, what, is that the language you'd like in?
I said properly illuminated American flag displayed from sunrise to sunset every day. And then just to bring everybody back up to speed, in 5B, it does say narrowly focused on the thing of interest. So, the lights would be focused on the flag, not, every which way.
Okay. All right, so we have a motion and a second to amend the ordinance as written to include the exemption for the illumination of an American flag, or are you specifying an American flag?
I did because that's the guideline put out by the United States Veterans Affairs folks.
Okay, great. All right, is there any further discussion on the amendment? Okay, then I'll call for the question. Mr. Bibby, I'm sorry. Do you have any comments or questions on the amendment to put an exemption in for flags? Roger? I'm going to say we've lost Mr. Bibby. All right, then
Then
we'll call for the question. If you'll poll the
we'll
council.
have to poll if Roger's not there, right? Can we just raise?
He's
hands?
not here, so we're going to assume we dropped him.
Okay. So, all in favor, raise your right hand, right? We're all here.
Okay,
That's what I was saying.
all right. All those opposed to the amendment? The amendment fails. So we go back to the original ordinance as it was presented. It's an ordinance on first reading creating exterior lighting standards. You want to read that title again, Mr. Skogstad?
We still have discussion.
We will.
Just an ordinance creating exterior lighting standards. That's what we have. That's what it's titled.
All right.
Here.
So we have a motion and a second.
That's what it's titled.
There you go. You wrote it, so there you go. All right. So we have a motion and a second for an ordinance on first reading creating exterior lighting standards. Is there any further discussion?
I think it is important to be looking ahead and not, there are. I think it's important to put some expectations in place, and that's kind of how I think I would see this, as expectations for how we would want businesses to either come to our community or remain in our community. Because it's going to be a great place to do business and to be. I don't want to see us, come across a scenario where somebody does not have the same judgment that we might have about what is appropriate lighting. Because I would disagree with, if whoever has the place on my street thinks it's appropriate, I disagree. But that's subjective. So I think it would be important to have something in place that says, you know what, we agree. Like we think that this is the kind of lighting we'd like to have in our business district, in our commercial area. I think that would be important to have, especially because then at some point in the future, there's going to be another issue, and they are going to be able to say, you don't have any regulation on that, and they'd be right. So I think it's important to have some sort of expectation, and maybe have something that's sort of broad, or something that's still reasonable, and something that is not restrictive. I would be in favor of this.
Okay.
I have one more comment. Our brick and mortars fighting for their lives against the Amazons and everything else of the world. This is just adding more expense, more reason not to come to our city. The 20th Street place is going to go away. I mean, our community is not going to support those types of installations, I don't think. And if it does, that means our community supports it. These additional regulation after regulation after regulation, I think we're ill-advised, and I don't support it.
So can I ask you a question?
No, you can't.
Sure.
Mr. Hazinger?
If there's any way you want to discourage businesses, just regulate them to death.
Chris?
So how does this cause undue burden on businesses? I'm not sure how that makes sense to me. I think it helps protect the city of Vienna. It helps create some kind of clarification on our expectations for what lighting should be. It's not like if this passes tomorrow, every commercial business is going to have to flip all their lights. I mean, we've set this up so that it doesn't really affect any of our current businesses, and it elevates the bar a little bit. Yeah, so it might be a little bit more cumbersome than just slapping a bunch of LED lights all around your building and lighting up whatever you want to. But I think that's okay, because I don't know that the city of Vienna wants to be so lit up in such a way that it seems unprofessional. I think that this lays out very clear regulations and guidelines for that, and actually kind of helps businesses understand and know how to light their business so that it looks appropriate for our city.
I also think that in the future, let's say a business right now who's currently operating, they know they're going to need to, remodel, or they've got to redo their parking lot, they're going to redo their lighting, whatever is going to happen, that's going to be 15, 20 years from now. The technology and the lights and the efficiencies and all of that stuff is, everything's, I remember thinking, I couldn't believe incandescent bulbs were going away, and so things are progressing, and it's possible that even whatever we pass now is going to look like, oh, well, that's going to be super easy to comply with, because we don't even make those things anymore. Or, that the trend at that time may be more efficient, more, whatever. If it's in demand for commercial businesses, if these are commercial grade lights and whatever's happening, I'm with Chris. I don't think that this is not going to run any business that we currently have out of town. And by the time they have to upgrade something, it's going to be the more cost efficient thing to do anyway. Again, I go back to, if you don't have anything, if you don't have an expectation, you're leaving yourself wide open. And I think having an expectation, whether it's, this might be extreme, or try to follow my parallel. We talk about, I don't have any teenage daughters, but if I had teenage daughters, I would want them to dress modestly, and I want them to take pride in themselves, and to not, open themselves up to, perceptions of young men, right? So I would enforce this, I would want them to say, this is my expectation of you, and this is why I'm protecting you. And you might not understand it right now, but I'm protecting you. And at the same time, I feel like here we can say, if you don't have any rules at all, then kind of everything goes. And you're just waiting for somebody to agree with your opinion.
So, to that point, I am a business owner. I have a business, and I've had a business on Grand Central Avenue since 2012. And I would like to have that protection of knowing that my neighbor next to me, which would never happen because we know who my neighbor is, Mr. Diggy Dog, which is one of Vienna's finest businesses. But if my neighbor next to me wanted to light it up like Las Vegas, I would be forced to move my business that I've put in a significant investment plus blood, sweat, and tears and all that stuff for the last 11 years. Because my clients come to me and expect a certain level of service, and they expect a certain level of, this doesn't look like some rundown, sleazy place, okay? And so if you don't enact this, then you put businesses like mine at risk. Because I think that, I mean, what we're seeing on 20th Street, what prevents that from happening? You know, Bob Dutton sat there for years with Vienna Pharmacy, or Dutton Pharmacy rather, and, you know, that's a nice little piece of property right in the Central District. Nothing prevents somebody from opening that up as, you know, whatever, and then lighting it so we can see it from space. And what does that do to the other businesses, the other neighbors? So, you know, I think I've heard a lot of talk tonight about pro-business, and I'm going to tell you right now, I'm pro-business. If I wasn't pro-business, I wouldn't be able to eat or pay my mortgage, okay? But I think at some point it stops. It's just like when we talk about commercial districts and businesses being in commercial districts, to hear some folks up here tell it, we should just open up the doors and let businesses everywhere, including your neighborhoods. I mean, there has to be some limit, and I think this is a very good, reasonable ordinance, something that should have been addressed a long time ago, and it will also help protect the businesses like mine who already exist.
So we have an ordinance on the floor that's been moved and seconded. Be it ordained by the Common Council of the City of Vienna that it hereby adopts the following ordinance with respect to the regulation of interior lighting throughout the City of Vienna. Would you poll council, please?
Is Mr. Bibby back?
Mr. Bibby is not with us.
Okay. All in favor of the ordinance on first reading, please raise your right hand. All those opposed? 3-3.
Motion dies 3-3. We move to item number 6 this evening. It's an ordinance on first reading defining, regulating the location of vape or smoke shops. Be it ordained by the Common Council of the City of Vienna that it hereby regulates the location of vape/smoke shops as follows. Mr. Skogstad, I believe you've included 6 or how many pages this time? Multiple. All right. Have you all had a chance to read this? All right, then I'll read it by title only, or I've read it by title only. So I'll entertain a motion for the approval on first reading of an ordinance defining, regulating the location of vape or smoke shops.
So moved.
Second.
Mr. Mancuso, this one's also yours. Would you?
Yeah, so a brief introduction on this one. The intent and purpose to bring this before council does in somewhat relate to the recent vape shops that have opened in locations that we have received, at least I have as a council person, received many comments on. So this ordinance helps kind of guide the direction and limitations of an age-restricted product that we want to avoid having near places where our youth currently exist, in our schools and churches and neighborhoods. So this ordinance kind of helps define those locations and set boundaries for where something like a vape shop that sells a very specific, very age-restricted product can be located in the city of Vienna.
Further discussion?
I just mentioned Planning Commission did not support this ordinance either, and nor do
I believe the Planning Commission actually voted this one.
I think
through
only
council.
Craig Metz said yes because he wanted to see. I didn't get minutes from the last Planning Commission meeting, so I'm going from memory. So I could be standing corrected, but I don't believe this was advanced by the Planning Commission either.
I
That's
just,
my recollection.
Mr. Mancuso, I'd like a clarification. Under regulations 4A, section 4, no vape/smoke shop shall be located within 1,500 feet of any other vape/smoke shop between 10th Street and 20th Street. Why did you pick out 10th to 20th?
I believe that's because that was our main commercial district, so we would assume that's where a lot of them would end up being located due to the other restrictions.
Well, that's a little strange because the ones we have now are above 20th and on 34th. So I don't know why you restricted it to that. I just thought maybe you had a reasoning.
The original draft suggested to remove, there was a restriction on vape shops above 20.
Yeah.
Very popular.
Yeah, so what we tried to do here is we're not trying to segregate the city of Vienna into Upper Vienna and Lower Vienna, or East Vienna and West Vienna or anything like that. So the other regulations in this leading up to that point, because of churches and synagogues, daycare facilities, schools, and all of those things, we felt strongly that that would basically eliminate anything, in that area that's much more residential in the city of Vienna. But we also wanted to address in our commercial district where there are no churches or schools, to try to help just regulate how many, of these can just pop up, because we don't want 6 of them to pop up in one, strip mall or area in the city of Vienna, and then that's all there is. So,
But if the language stays in the ordinance as you have it written here, that would be the first indicator for me if I were going to put in a new business, that I have to locate it above 21st Street, above 20th Street. There's one in 20th is where the one is now. All right. And so if you go above 23rd Street, you have schools, you have churches, you have all those other institutions.
right.
Okay. And it seems like you're saying everything has to go into that zone.
No, I'm saying if
I'm
you
sorry,
read,
point of order, I can't hear. Thank
If-
you.
if you read the regulations, it says no vape shop shall be located within 1,500 feet of any church, synagogue, temple, mosque, or other places of worship. No vape shop shall be located within 1,500 feet of any daycare facility, childcare facility, periarchal, character, charter, public or private elementary school, middle school, high school, or any related facilities, including but not limited to athletic fields, auditoriums, stadiums, arenas, or other educational facilities operated by the Wood County Board of Education, charter schools, or parochial schools for an educationally related purpose. So, in that sense, if you can find somewhere north of 20th Street that is less than 1,500 feet away from any of those, then you've done a really good job.
Well, the other thing I just want to make clear is vape shops are commercial, or they're a commercial business, they're business, they're commercial. To have a vape shop, you would have to have it on commercial property. This limits the regulations to just C1 zones. The areas above 20th Street, the only thing I think that falls into the end of that is the one property that's a non-conforming zone. The areas between 10th and 20th are the smaller, basically that's, I don't want to call it a strip mall, but that's lighter commercial district area. And that limits to within 1,500 feet of those. And then you have all of the restrictions as far as proximity to churches and schools and so forth. And then below that, the rest of the commercial district, they don't have that specific limitation as far as the distance and number of that distance limitation that you have between 10th and 20th Street. You can't have more. You can't have them, closer than 1,500 feet, within 1,500 feet of each other. So that's one thing. Well, I think that
Okay.
answers the question.
Further comments, please.
Well, I would like to make a comment. It's been said, I don't know how many times this evening, that whatever has gone before the planning commission and they didn't move on it or they rejected it or whatever. I'd like to remind everybody that the planning commission is volunteers and I respect their service, but they're appointed. They're not elected. They are not getting the telephone calls, I'm sure, that I get, or the emails or the texts that I get, especially regarding vape shops. I've been raised in Vienna. We want Vienna to be a certain way, and I think we need some regulation on these vape shops. And I think this is once again very reasonable ordinance that Mr. Mancuso has worked with the city attorney and code enforcement to write. Very reasonable. I think we need to pass it. And just because the planning commission didn't act on something, like I said, they're not the ones that are dealing with the constituents and the residents of Vienna who they call us. They're not calling whoever on the planning commission because they probably don't even know the planning commission exists. So,
Is there any further comments? All right, then I'll call for the question. All those in favor of the ordinance defining regulating the location of vape/smoke shops, please signify by raising your right hand. All those opposed, same sign. Motion dies 3-3. That concludes our agenda this evening. We move now to council comments.
I just have a comment. I hope the mayor can explain a little bit more about, because now I think everybody's totally confused about what was brought up in public forum by Ms. Rhodes this evening about Spencer's Landing and what is under the land use covenants and what can be done, et cetera.
I don't believe that's on the agenda this evening, if somebody wants to put it on, but these are all public record, so I don't think it's been noticed, so I don't think we're going to take it as an agenda.
Well, then I'll put it on, I'll ask the recorder Elam that it can be on the next agenda then, so we can have a discussion so that we understand the definitions, because it's very important that we understand that, because once again, we've put money in the budget coming up, and we're hopefully going to start some development there, and so everybody understands what can and cannot be done.
Also, keep in mind, and I'm sure that it's public record, and the repository should be current from our license remediation specialist at the Vienna Library. And there's maps, I mean, that show just what it is. So, yeah, I'll be happy to discuss it next council meeting.
Thank you.
I would like to make one comment if I can. You know, I chose to run for this position when I did, because I really want to see Vienna grow and prosper. And all three ordinances that were voted down this evening, I spent many months on working with the code enforcement officer, our city attorney, having many discussions and emails back and forth with them, talking with other council members. All of those things I felt were in the best interest for the city of Vienna. I want the city of Vienna to be successful. I want it to be safe, and I want it to be inviting for people of all ages. So I'm definitely a little bit frustrated by the way that things turned out this evening, but that will not deter me from continuing to try and serve this community and make sure that it is a better and safer place for everyone that lives here. Thank you.
So I just want one comment to something that Councilwoman Williams put forth. The Planning Commission's a lot more solid than what you give it credit for, because every one of the members that serves on that Planning Commission was voted and approved by this body. And so you can say they're not elected, but they were. They were voted into that position for their expertise. And a lot of those people that serve on the Planning Commission are business owners. They're developers. They're people that understand the dynamics of what it takes to make a city welcoming. And so I take a lot of stock in their opinions, because they do different things to make our town better. And so I appreciate the service that they give us. It's very difficult to fill those positions. And so to have the group of people that we have on there now, they're very knowledgeable, and they do add a lot to the value of the decisions that we make. So, they just didn't happen to walk in and find a seat there.
I didn't disparage them at all. As a matter of fact, I said I respected their service. I said they have a different role than us, and we're getting out, the community's reaching out to us with things that they need done, and not necessarily members of the Planning Commission. So if you misinterpreted that I was disparaging them, that's not my intent at all. And I said so.
I found the condiments to be actually condescending. The Planning Commission, which I'm a liaison from City Council, is made up of people who do have expertise in these areas, and they're not a rubber stamp. I mean, the things that come, you don't know, which way people are going to go, and the discussions are good and sometimes animated. But yeah, I think that, that why, in fact, a Planning Commission member said to me, why even have a Planning Commission, if the you know, if we're not recommending this and it just plows forward. And of course, we're entitled as council to consider those things, but yeah, and I believe that people do know and do speak to the planning commission, and there's nothing special that you're elected as a city council person that you're the only one that somebody bends your ear.
Okay. Tammy, I will put it on the agenda to talk about the letter that I received and the follow-up letters. It's, as Jim pointed out, there are no surprises here. It's documented in black and white exactly what the land use covenants are. Okay, so we can have that discussion at another council meeting. And I'm sorry, the intent was to put the ordinance on the agenda this evening for the 57th Street property, but there was a conflict in the notification. We didn't get the legal ad in the paper fast enough to make that window. So we've got all those things in place now, and the 57th Street property will be on. It may not be the next one because I don't believe the posting comes out before that, but it will be as soon as the legal notice is served its time. Bob, thank you very much for coming this evening. Sometimes we need a parliamentarian. Maybe we can get Speaker Hanshaw to come up, you know? So, yeah, we're not going to get you. We'll get, but anyway, with that,